Welcome back, everyone. This is Just Two Assholes Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell.
And this is episode 11. We made it this far, so hope you guys are still listening. So today, we're recording Friday night, so we actually had some big news in the NFL today as far as trades. Not fantasy trades, but real trades. So the Cleveland Browns traded Carlos Hyde to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a 5th-round pick. And what are your thoughts on this?
I don't really understand this trade for the Browns, honestly. They just signed Carlos Hyde this offseason. I understand they probably believe in Nick Chubb a lot, but you just signed Hyde. He's been pretty productive in what has been a really bad run game. But other than that, Carlos Hyde has been everything they've needed him to be. He's a really good pass blocker as well. I don't know if Chubb can compete with him on that front. So I don't understand this trade from the Browns side, but I really understand it from Jacksonville's side. So a 5th-round pick to lock up your running back spot in case Leonard Fournette, it's a hamstring issue. So it could keep him out for an extended period of time. Reports right now are that he should be back after the bye week. I think week 9 is the designation right now. But this trade makes me think that they're not confident he's going to return that quickly. How about you?
Yeah, like you said, so he was a 2nd-round pick originally out of San Francisco. Picked him up. He got signed to a 3-year deal this offseason. 3-year, $16 million. So not a giant chunk of change for Jacksonville to take on, but $7 million was guaranteed, so Jacksonville's going to have to pay that. But yeah, they must be going with a rookie movement. I mean, they got Baker Mayfield and now Nick Chubb in there, so they just must want to get these guys carries and get them a lot of reps. But yeah, I like this from Jacksonville because their coach came out today and said, hey, I don't know when he's coming back. I hope he's going to come back after the bye. And TJ Yeldon has been beat up a little bit with an ankle injury. It hasn't slowed him down really at all these past couple weeks, but they signed Jamal Charles last week off the streets pretty much, and he got 5 carries for 5 yards. So they must not like what they've seen out of him, and they know if Fournette is going to be out long term, they needed someone reliable. Like you say, he's a great pass blocker, and right now he's 11th in the league total with 382 yards rushing. He only has 6 catches, but 5 touchdowns so far, so that's pretty good. He's averaging 3.5 rushing yards, but I mean, with Cleveland, with the first couple of weeks with Tyrod in there, you knew that their main focus wasn't going to be the run game. So it started to open up a little bit when Baker got in there. It definitely helped his game a lot. So in Jacksonville, you know they're not going to rely on Blake Bortles. So they're going to have a strong run game, and this is just more insurance and really backs up TJ Yeldon's.
Yeah, as a Carlos Hyde owner, I'm really excited about this. So it looks like he's probably not going to play this week, which kind of hurts me because I was planning on starting him, so I had to find a replacement on my bench for him this week. But the Leonard Fournette owner has already hit me up saying that he wants to trade for Carlos Hyde, and I bet a couple other people might hit me up as well because this makes it seem like Fournette's not going to be back for a while, and this thing could nag him all season. And if that happens, Hyde's stock skyrockets. And if that's the case, I want him on my team still, but this is a spot where I can either trade him or keep him, honestly, and probably make a profit either way.
Yeah, I think maybe if I were you, he's hot now, you could trade him, but if you wait 2 weeks, because we already said he's not going to do too much this week, say in 2 weeks he actually goes off. I believe that's their bye week, so maybe week 3. If Fournette's still out, see, that's what you have to wait on. That's the question. Do you trade him now and see if Fournette comes back and then his value tanks? Or do you just trade him now and get the value you can right now? I guess since they have a bye week in 2 weeks, it's really going to be 3 weeks if Fournette's out to see what he actually is in this offense that strike while the iron's hot right now. So I would trade him this week.
Yeah, so I'd expect Hyde to start in week 8 against Philadelphia. He probably won't play at all this week against Houston, but against Philly, he'll probably start. And if he does well, I think that's a nice spot to try and trade him. Honestly, I'm giving information to anyone in our league who listens to the podcast, unfortunately. But I expect in week 8 we hear news that Fournette might not be ready in week 10. And that's why they made this move for Carlos Hyde. And if that's the case, I'm really happy here because they don't trust Blake Bortles at all, and they shouldn't. And they want to run the ball as much as humanly possible. And that's going to help Hyde out a lot because that's a much better offensive line there than in Cleveland as well.
Yeah, it definitely is. Something else that we heard around the league is Marshawn Lynch. So he's dealing with a groin injury. And John Gruden came out and said, I don't know if he's going to go to the IR. So that could be really big in Oakland. Like when he was healthy earlier in the season, not the past 2 weeks, he was really good. Had average, I think, like 80 or 90 yards a game. So he was their number one running back. But now this could be big if he does go on the AIR or at least on the injury report for the next couple of weeks. This could be big for Jalen Richard owners. I mean, he popped in the preseason, hasn't done too much since Lynch was their main back, but since Lynch has been a little beat up, he's getting more reps. So if Lynch goes on the shelf, the injury shelf, definitely the Jalen Richard, if he's not owned, go ahead and pick him up.
Yeah, I believe Richard is owned in our league right now. He is. So he is currently owned by, give me just a second here, the Tobias Anal Rapist. So this is a really, really good spot for him. But it's probably also a good spot for his backup, which would be Doug Martin, I believe.
Yeah.
Doug Martin could see a huge uptick in carries here if Marshawn Lynch is out for a while. Because Jalen Richard is nice, but he's mainly a pass-catching back. He's not your main three-down back, and we've seen Doug Martin in the past be a three-down back. So I wouldn't be shocked if they went to Doug Martin starting and gave him 60% of the carries and then the other 40% and passing downs to Jalen Richard. So it looks like Doug Martin might be a decent free agent pickup if need be. We run a 5-man bench, so it makes it a lot harder to add him, but there's a couple teams in our league who desperately need a running back right now, including the Marshawn Lynch owner, who currently, I think he has to start Chris Ivory this week, so that's a really tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, with Isaiah Crowell being a little injured, it helps his situation a little bit. But, yeah, he's got to pick up we're talking about Team Cortez. That's who we're talking about in our league. But, yeah, he definitely needs to add some running backs or trade or do something. But we'll talk about that a little later when we break down the matchups. But I guess big injuries are happening to number one running backs on teams. So it's just something that happens in the real NFL and then in fantasy. And you just got to flow with it and make sure you're listening to the news and everything, and go ahead and pick up some running backs or make some trades. You got to stay active in fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other big news in the NFL this week? No? Nah, we've got nothing much more to go on, so I think we're going to jump straight into the matchups in our fantasy league this week. This is Just a Group of Assholes Fantasy League. We'll start out with my matchup here, the Meme Team Dream Team, which is my team versus Stairway to Evans. I'm obviously picking myself in this matchup. It's a tough spot because Stairway to Evans' team is really, really strong. He puts up over 100 points, it seems, every single week. He had that one down week, I think, where he only scored like 60 or 70 fantasy points because none of his receivers showed up. But other than that, he's been the model of consistency, putting up over 100 points. He's sitting at 3-3. I'm sitting at 2-4. So I am starting Jared Goff this week against the Niners because I think it's just a really, really nice spot for him. He'll probably have 25 fantasy points in the first 3 quarters, and then they might honestly bring their backup in because I think they'll be beating my San Francisco 49ers by that much. Then McCaffrey and Frank Gore. I'm starting Frank Gore this week over Matt Breida and James White. This was a tough spot for me. This could change in the near future. I just really like what the Dolphins are doing with Frank Gore right now. I think Adam Gase doesn't trust Kenyon Drake all that much because he's much more of a horizontal runner than a north-south runner, which is something you told me earlier. As well as Frank Gore is on the hunt for more rushing records and just trying to get that gold jacket. I think Gase is trying to help him out as much as possible. On top of that, Detroit is surrendering over 5 yards per carry right now to opposing running backs. So this is a really nice spot for Frank Gore. After that, I've got Mike Evans and Julian Edelman. This is a decent little wide receiver combo. This could be a nice week for Mike Evans. Julian Edelman might get benched, depending on if I feel like Sammy Watkins could pop off against Cincinnati, as Watkins is on my bench, but right now I am rolling with Edelman. Kyle Rudolph is my tight end. He hasn't been great so far this year, but he's a really, really talented tight end on a really talented offense, so I like his stock going into the future weeks. It hasn't been great so far, but eventually he's going to pop off for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns or something like that. Hopefully that's this week. In my flex spot, I'm starting Tariq Cohen again over James White and Matt Breida, and this is mainly just because Cohen has been the hot hand in Chicago, and I want to ride that. New England isn't all that great against pass-catching backs, which is mainly what Cohen is. So I'm hoping they keep throwing him the ball 6-7 times per game, and he keeps getting that 80-90 receiving yards he's been getting. Then I picked up the Colts defense against Buffalo because Buffalo is starting Derek Anderson at quarterback, and I think this is basically a layup. He's got to throw 2 interceptions in this game. And then I've got Harrison Butker at kicker.
Yeah, so this is a tough matchup for me. I chose Steroid Evans, so sorry I'm not picking your team this week. So Jameis Winston playing Cleveland. So Cleveland's defense started out real strong. They had that big game against Pittsburgh, but they kind of just slowed down and really hasn't done too much these past couple weeks. They've given up a lot of points, which that's what Tampa Bay does. They score a lot of points. They run a lot of vertical routes. And they don't have a real big run game, but I don't think they're going to need it against Cleveland. So I think he'll have a pretty decent game, at least 20 points. Joe Mixon versus Kansas City. We just saw that game that James White just had against them. So I don't think Joe Mixon can do any worse. I mean, he'll probably be close to what he was having. So I think he'll have a solid game, maybe 100 yards and then a touchdown. The only real question I had on this was Adrian Peterson. He's questionable, and I mean, he's been so up and down this season. They're playing Dallas. So let's see. Yeah, so the last 2 weeks after their bye week, he had 4 points and 9 points. So last week, he actually had 97 yards, but I think he had a fumble in there as well. But he does not catch balls at all. So it's strictly his running game. And Dallas has a really good defensive line. They really do. Sean Lee's healthy again, and they got Jalen Smith playing in there and linebackers. So I don't like this matchup as well for him. But then for wide receivers, you got Julio Jones and Michael Thomas. Julio Jones is playing the Giants. They've already shown they really can't stop any offense this year. The Giants' defense is just garbage right now. Michael Thomas, that's going to be a tough game because we talked about it on our last podcast. Drew Brees has never won in Baltimore. Baltimore has a really stingy defense like usual. So it could be a tough game for Michael Thomas, but his thing is he gets at least 10 catches a game. So I think he should have a decent game, maybe 15 points. O.J. Howard, so his main tight end was Jimmy Graham, and he's on bye week. So we had to go to O.J. Howard. I know there's not too much out there for the free agents for our league. So he had to play O.J. Howard. I don't like this too much against Cleveland. I know Cleveland's not a good defense, but Jameis loves Cameron Brate. He really hasn't done anything with O.J. Howard since he's came back. He did have a touchdown last week, but he only had 40 yards, so really touchdown dependent. And then in his flex, he's got Peyton Barber for his for his running back. Maybe put in Naheem Hines for Indianapolis, which is on your bench. He didn't do anything at all last week, I guess. Only four points, so I guess you kind of have to go Peyton Barber and just hope. That's pretty rough in the flex. I'm starting to regret this pick, but oh well. I trust in you, Stairway. And then Vikings defense against the Jets. Going against a rookie quarterback, I know Sam Darnold has been good. He's thrown a couple picks though this year, and I know a lot of their wide receivers for the Jets are hurt. And like I said, Isaiah Crowell is also hurt as well with an ankle. So I'm looking for a good game for the defense or for Vikings defense. So yeah, I'm picking Steroid Evans. It's going to be close though. So this is definitely a matchup to watch in our league.
Yeah, if I was impartial and like no bias in this matchup, I would probably pick Stairway just because I do like his roster a little bit better than mine. It's mainly his wide receivers are just so good, and I really like Joe Mixon this week. But I got to go with my team here. I think we can hopefully keep it close and just kind of pray for a win at Sunday night or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and being 2-4, you need this win.
Yeah, this is a huge one for me. Moving on to your matchup, one Tyreek Hill versus I Ain't No Fournette Son. I have your team winning this matchup over I Ain't No Fournette Son, so I'll go ahead and let you talk about your team right now.
Yeah, so I also chose my team to win. So Philip Lindsay, just starting off, got me 15.5 points for my running back position because they played on Thursday night against Arizona. He had a pretty solid game. Him and Royce Freeman are trading carries, they are. But Philip Lindsay had 90 yards and a touchdown, and he had quite a few catches as well. Let's see, he had 38 yards off 2 catches, so that's pretty good. But yeah, 15.5 points for a running back, that's solid, especially when I got Todd Gurley in there as well. So they're playing San Francisco. You mentioned that San Francisco, you're looking for Jared Goff to have a big game. I'm looking for that entire offense to have a big game against San Francisco defense. So Todd Gurley, just keep doing your thing. Give me another 40 points like you did last week. Help me out. So Matt Stafford. I was debating between Joe Flacco versus New Orleans or Matt Stafford in Miami. I think that the Baltimore game is going to be kind of ugly. Maybe 2018. I think it's going to be 20 or less points for each side. So I didn't see big potential for Joe Flacco and Matthew Stafford. So Miami's secondary is pretty good. but they did let up a lot of points to Andy Dalton last week, and somehow Miami pulled it out of their ass and pulled out a win. Really, the ball bounced their way, and they got that win. But I can trust in Matthew Stafford to probably get 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns and a pick. So I'm good with that for Matthew Stafford. Stephon Diggs against the Jets. So we already talked about their defense against Jets, and the Jets defense is not. It's in the bottom half of the NFL, and I just like Minnesota's offense in general. I mean, they got Adam Thielen. Their running back is beat up a little bit. Cook, he's already been ruled out, so they are going to have to rely on the passing game more. I know Adam Thielen's that number one guy, and he's definitely stated that so far this season. So Stephon Diggs, a solid wide receiver 2, though. And they're playing against the Jets, so I'm looking for him to have a pretty good game. Tyreek Hill versus Cincinnati. We saw how Albert Wilson was used against Cincinnati. I look Tyreek Hill, that same explosive. I mean, he's even better than Albert Wilson, but he's that explosive kind of jack of all trades player, and I'm looking for him to have a really good game. He got me 3 touchdowns last week. Austin Hooper, he's been solid for me. I'm starting him over Trey Burton versus New England. He's done really well for me these past 2 weeks, so I'm just riding him. And they're playing the Giants too. We already talked about how their defense is not very good this year. Corey Clement, so I actually got him off of free agents like 2 weeks ago, so I'm happy about that. Now that Ajayi is out, they're playing Carolina. He's their number one guy. I know they split carries like 60-40 or 70-30 in his favor with Smallwood, but yeah, he's going to get most of the carries, so he should have a good game. I got the Browns defense versus Tampa Bay. I don't like this. I might have to look at our free agents and see who we got, because Tampa Bay, I mean, Jameis could just lay an egg, but I always talk about the Browns defense getting progressively worse throughout the season, so I'll probably have to look and see who's out there. And then I got Dame Bailey, which since he's been signed, he's been pretty solid. So, yep, I'm picking one Tyreek Hill to win.
Yeah, I like your roster here a lot, especially Stephon Diggs against the Jets. The Jets have given up a huge amount of points to opposing wide receiver cores. I mean, week 1, 38.5 points, week 2, 20, week 3, 24, then 37, 44, and 33. So teams have been able to throw all over the New York Jets, and Thielen is going to get a bulk of those catches, but the other throws are going to go Stephon Diggs' way, especially with Dalvin Cook being out. So this is a really nice spot for him. Moving on to I Ain't No Fournette's son. He's starting Baker Mayfield against Tampa Bay. I like this matchup a lot. Baker Mayfield was my sleeper quarterback pick this week because Tampa Bay's defense is just a sieve. They haven't stopped anybody this year, and I don't think they're going to stop Baker Mayfield either. He doesn't have a lot of great receiving threats, but with Carlos Hyde gone, I'd look for Duke Johnson to have a huge game in the passing attack here, as well as David Njoku. And you know Jarvis Landry is going to see probably 14 targets and 10 catches this game for probably right around 90 to 100 yards, and maybe even a touchdown. Kareem Hunt, Austin Eckler on his running back spots. Kareem Hunt has been killing it the past couple weeks. He started out the season really slow, but has really picked it up. This is a nice spot for him again against Cincinnati. This game should be just not really a fist fight. I don't want to say that because that means more of a defensive battle, but it's going to be, both teams are going to have a great passing attack and running attack in this matchup, I think. The Bengals versus running backs have been pretty bad. They're 22nd in the league overall in our fantasy league. Austin Eckler is a nice piece. I think he's kind of big play or touchdown dependent, so I would be happier if he had another running back in this spot, but I don't hate Austin Eckler, so it's an okay start. Then in his wide receiver spot, he's got Kenny Galladay and Tyler Boyd. I like Tyler Boyd in this matchup a lot for the same reason I like Kareem Hunt. There's going to be a lot of points scored in this game, and a touchdown or two could go Tyler Boyd's way. He's proven to be one of the best wide receiver twos in the league so far. Kenny Galladay I like a little bit less, especially if he sees a lot of Xavier Howard for the Dolphins, because he's a really solid cornerback, and I don't think they're going to put Xavier Howard on Golden Tate, as Tate plays a lot more out of the slot. So it's either going to be Marvin Jones or Kenny Galladay that he sees a lot of. It's just, I kind of wish he was starting, I guess, on his bench he has Marquise Goodwin and Kenny Stills, so I guess Kenny Galladay is your best chance here, but I might go with Goodwin just just for the chance that he pops off again. Because the Niners are going to have to try and keep up with the Rams, which means they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, and they're going to have to throw it to Marquise Goodwin. The dude is just so fast. It's insane. No one can keep up with him. In his tight end spot, he already had Ricky Seals-Jones go, who got injured in that Arizona versus Denver game. He only got 2 fantasy points. So that's a rough spot for him, and one of the big reasons why I picked you to win this matchup. His tight end only got 2 points. That's really tough to come back from. In his flex, he's got Josh Gordon against Chicago. Gordon has, it's been reported that he's now playing in practice at full speed, so he does have a questionable designation right now, but I think he's much closer to 100% than he's been all year. And Tom Brady really likes throwing him the ball in the end zone, so this could be a big game for him, honestly. The Lions' defense is his starting defense against Miami. This is a decent spot for them. I just don't think the Lions' defense is all that good of a defense. Let's see. Right now, they are the 22nd ranked defense in the league, and it's not like Miami's offense is horrible, but they are starting Brock Osweiler, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so starting Brock Osweiler, this could be a good spot for the Lions D. They do have talented cornerbacks. Their secondary is pretty good. I like Quandre Diggs a lot. They could see a few interceptions. If they get a pick 6, this would be a really nice spot for him. And then Robbie Gould at kicker is a solid overall kicker. So off his bench, I would maybe start Marquise Goodwin here over Kenny Galladay, but it's really more of a coin toss if you want to go boom or bust or go for the solid 7 to 10 fantasy points that I think Kenny Galladay is going to get you. But yeah, I just like your team more in this matchup.
Yeah, and it definitely hurts. It makes it a lot closer matchup that I don't have Cooper Kupp.
Yep.
He's been ruled out and with the MCL sprain. So Sean McVay actually came out and said, hey, he might not start this, or he's not playing this week, and I don't know how long he's going to be out, because with a team like the Rams, you want to save your players if you don't really need them to start. They have a pretty good wide receiver core, so they want to save him, get him healthy. So this could hurt me later down the season, and I hope he recovers quickly. But yeah, this is going to be a good matchup for me. I think the next one we're going to go to will be Dick Dangla versus Jimmy G Spot Rockers.
Yeah, so in this matchup, I have Dick Dangla winning this matchup, and a lot of it comes down to Emmanuel Sanders already put up 24 fantasy points in that win over Arizona. He had a really, really nice game. I think he threw a touchdown, he caught a touchdown.
Yep.
Let's jump into the stats here for a second. He had 6 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown, plus that throwing touchdown for 24 fantasy points. Really nice spot for him here. His other starting spots, he's got Tom Brady at quarterback against Chicago. This is a good matchup for him as well. Chicago's defense has a really good pass rush, but Tom Brady has one of the quickest releases in the league, and I don't think the Bears' secondary is as good as people think it is, mainly because their pass rush is so good, but Tom Brady can beat that pretty easily. Alvin Kamara has been down lately with the return of Mark Ingram. Well, I say lately, just 1 week against Washington. He only had 6 carries for 24 yards and 4.5 fantasy points because they didn't throw him the ball a lot. If that trend continues where Ingram is getting the bulk of the carries, it hurts Kamara's stock a lot. He was the best fantasy player through the first couple weeks of the season, and Mark Ingram's return really just killed him in fantasy, it looks like. So hopefully that's not the case, and Alvin Kamara can have quite a few catches and maybe a touchdown here. He's starting TJ Yeldon at RB2. I like Yeldon a lot this week because Fournette is still out. They did just trade for Carlos Hyde, but I don't expect Carlos Hyde to start or even play this week, so the bulk of the carries and passing down should go to TJ Yeldon against Houston. Houston does have a pretty good defense and a pretty good run defense, but if they're going to beat J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney and that pass rush, it's going to be screens to Yeldon, so he could see quite a few pass yards. At wide receiver 2, because his wide receiver 1 was Sanders, we already talked about him, Cole Beasley. Cole Beasley's had a really nice couple of weeks these past few weeks. Actually, just the one good last week against Jacksonville where he had 9 receptions for 101 yards and 26 fantasy points. So maybe he's kind of chasing points here. Washington's secondary is pretty good, but it's not like Josh Norman is going to be on Cole Beasley. And that's why they went to Cole Beasley so much last week, is because Jalen Ramsey wasn't on him either. So they're going to target the weaker corners, and that means Cole Beasley could see a lot of targets and a lot of receptions this week, so I like that matchup. At tight end, he's got CJ Uzomah, which was one of my top 5 tight ends this week, so I really like that spot for him there against Kansas City. Just a lot of points are going to be scored here. The odds of him getting a touchdown, I think, are pretty good. In his flex, he's got Willie Snead. I don't know if I really like this pick for him, honestly. Willie Snead's had an okay season so far. He's averaging 8.2 fantasy points per game, but that's about his ceiling. His highest score so far this season has been 12 points in week 1. Last week he had 9.5. The week before that, 7.5. So I think you could find a better option here, someone with a little bit more boom potential. On your bench, you've got really no one to go off of. You need to drop Alfred Morris, I think. Devontae Adams is on a bye, so I would probably drop Alfred Morris for a wide receiver or a running back with a little bit more boom potential and start them in your flex. But I don't hate Willie Snead either because I think you're guaranteed those 8 fantasy points. He's starting the Chargers defense against Tennessee. I like this play a lot. This is a London game, so it's not really a home game for either team, but Tennessee's offense has just been so bad, and the Chargers defense has looked pretty decent so far, so I think this could be a good game for them. And then Graham Gano at kicker, solid overall kicker against Philadelphia. Some points are going to be scored in this game, so he's going to get you a couple extra points and probably a field goal or two. I like that matchup.
Yeah, so Dick Dangler and Jimmy G Spots will be a good matchup this week. And, your breakdown of Dick Dangler did make me want to change my pick. I picked Jimmy G Spot Rockers. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I want to pick Dick Dangler in this one.
I think you're allowed to do it, man. It's not locked in yet. We haven't talked about it yet.
All right,
so.
I'm going Dick Dangler.
All right.
All right, so the biggest thing was, just your breakdown on TJ Yeldon having still a good week. With him and Alvin Kamara for Dick Dangler is going to kind of make him break this because Jimmy G Spot Rockers, Drew Brees, we've already talked about Baltimore being a tough matchup. Right now they're first in the league against quarterbacks. They've only let up one 20-plus scoring quarterback against them this entire season. Let's see who that
It was Andy Dalton.
Andy Dalton.
Andy Dalton.
So, and that's when he went off and had 4 touchdowns against him. And then he's got Kenyon Drake and Sony Michel. So Sony Michel, they're running against Chicago. I like that matchup between him or against him because Sony Michel, he's been turning it on. New England is just, hey, they're running I formation and just pounding him up the middle, and it's working. And Chicago just let up, I think, over 180 yards with the Dolphins last week. So I like that for Sony Michel. We already talked about how Kenyon Drake and just it seems like Adam Gase doesn't trust him as much. They favor Frank Gore just because Frank Gore hits the hole so hard, and he doesn't try and go horizontal at all. If there's a hole, he'll hit it, he'll find it. So I don't like Kenyon Drake against Detroit. However, Detroit's defense is 28th in the league, so bottom 4 against the run. So he could go off, but I do not like that matchup at all. But I maybe would switch Nick Chubb in there against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think I would definitely start Nick Chubb here over Kenyon Drake. This is a spot for Nick Chubb to see a lot of carries. It would be a very Browns thing to do, though, to give all those carries to Duke Johnson.
Yeah. They already have announced that Gerald McCoy, though, for Tampa Bay is going to be out for this game.
Yep, that helps him a lot
so
more.
That could help. So then for his wide receiver is Odell and Keenan Allen. Odell against Atlanta. We already talked about Atlanta's defense is just horrible. And him and Saquon Barkley are the only offensive players really at all on their offense. So he should at least have a touchdown, hopefully. And then Keenan Allen, he's been down this year. He hasn't been a top 10 or even top 15 player, wide receiver this year, but he's still solid. And they're playing against Tennessee's defense. Will be a little bit stingy, but so far they're 13th, so right around average, right around the middle for the league. But just the Chargers' offense is just so powerful with all those wide receivers that they have. I just hope that he can get a touchdown.
Yeah, and fun fact about the Titans versus wide receivers, go ahead and click on that matchup and look at the teams they've surrendered low points to as far as wide receivers go. It is Jacksonville and Buffalo, 2 teams with terrible quarterback situations. Outside of that, 38 points to Miami's wide receivers, 46.5 to Houston's, 37 to Philadelphia, and 33 to Baltimore's. So the Chargers are a much better offensive team than Jacksonville and Buffalo.
Yeah, that's a good point out. So those numbers are a little bit skewed with Tennessee. To move on for tight end, Zach Ertz, I do like this. I like this matchup over C.J. Uzomah. So that's why I was leaning towards Jimmy G spots. But against Carolina, I picked up. We both had Zach Ertz for top 5 for tight end.
Yep.
He's just solid ever since Carson Wentz has came back. Last 3 games, 16 points, 22 points, and 13.5 points. And he had touchdowns in the last 2 games. So I'm looking for that to continue. Kerryon Johnson against Miami. Miami is 27th against running backs in the entire league. And so the last 4 games, really, 28 points against running backs, 44 against running backs, 20, and then 24. So, and that was against Oakland, New England, Cincinnati, and Chicago. So, I do like this matchup for Kerryon Johnson, especially because he is their number one running back now. They have announced that that's their game plan going through. So I do like this matchup. Texans defense, I think you had them for top 5. I had Jacksonville, so I think this just Blake Bortles. I don't trust him at all, so I think this is good, especially with J.J. Watt and Clowney and the rest of their defense just showing up these last couple weeks. And then Brett Maher against Washington. Hey, if Dallas has trouble getting into the end zone, this could be a big game for Maher. So I am picking Dick Dangla, and good luck.
Hopefully, I can make all my arguments for the teams I picked so strong you change your pick. Moving on to another game, I think we had different. Sack Lives Matter versus Wide Right. So I chose Wide Right in this matchup over Sack Lives Matter. And a lot of it comes down to Sack Lives Matter. They picked up the Cardinals' defense and then left them on their bench. So that was 6 points for him that they left on the bench. And they don't have another defense to replace them. So they're going to have to drop someone from their bench to replace this defense. And looking at it, I would say drop Mitchell Trubisky, but they're starting Russell Wilson right now, who's on a bye week, so they have to put Trubisky in. So Sack Lives Matter just really put himself in a tough spot here as far as picking which players are going to play, and that's a big reason why I chose Wide Right. He's starting Matt Ryan at quarterback against the Giants. The Giants have been middle of the road against opposing quarterbacks, 15th overall, but Matt Ryan is a very, very good quarterback. I think he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the league just because so many people talk crap about Matt Ryan and how he can't get the job done, but he puts up some huge fantasy weeks. At his running back spot, he's got Tevin Coleman and Wendell Smallwood. I don't like Smallwood here because Clement looks to be the lead back there. I kind of wish he would start someone else in this spot, but looking at his bench, it's tough. You maybe start Ito Smith and hope that he vultures a touchdown from Tevin Coleman because he's done that all year. But I would try and find someone other than Wendell Smallwood to start here. His wide receiver spot, T.Y. Hilton, Taylor Gabriel. Both of these guys have pretty good matchups. Gabriel has been a firecracker lately for Chicago. 13.5 points last week and 26.5 before their bye week in week 4 against Tampa Bay. The Patriots definitely do give up yardage on screenplays and stuff like that, so this could be a spot where Gabriel has a really nice game. T.Y. Hilton against Buffalo, I like that matchup a lot. Buffalo just doesn't have a corner who I think can compete with T.Y. Hilton, so this should be a good game for him, and a down game for Eric Ebron, I think, because Hilton is back. He's starting Jordan Reed at his tight end spot. Jordan Reed hasn't done much this year, but we know Jordan Reed's talent level. We know it's there. We know he can catch a lot of touchdown passes and really just be almost a number one wide receiver for that Washington team. And Alex Smith does love his tight ends, or historically does. He hasn't so far this year, but it's going to catch up at some point. Like it's going to revert back to the mean where Alex Smith loves throwing to his tight ends, and that tight end is going to be Jordan Reed. LaShawn McCoy in his flex spot is a solid play. I think he's good for 10 to 12 fantasy points every single week, and he does have that boom potential because he is a little bit older now, but he's still LaShawn McCoy. He's still as electric as any running back comes. So I like this spot for him against the Indianapolis Colts defense, who I do have starting on my team, but I think they could surrender some rushing yards and probably some passing yards to LaShawn McCoy here. The Eagles' defense against Carolina, I don't love this spot, but I don't think you can drop anyone on your team for any other defenses on the waiver wire. You kind of just got to roll with the Eagles and hope they don't get you negative points in this spot. And then Justin Tucker at kicker. Justin Tucker's the best kicker in the league, so good job there.
Yeah, so Wide Right definitely does have a good team, and Sack Life Matters. You got stuff to do. I did pick you to win. I'm just trying to trust in you. So Andy Dalton is out there for free agents. You could pick him up this week, drop Mitchell Trubisky, make that quick switch.
Or drop Theo Riddick.
Yeah, so I was going to say drop Theo Riddick or Mitchell Trubisky, or both of them, and pick up a quarterback and a defense. So Dallas's defense is still out there against Washington. So make those moves, please. So the rest of this, so Russell Wilson's on a bye, so hopefully he makes some moves with that. I like Saquon Barkley in this one against Atlanta. That's what really kind of sold me on this. Bilal Powell with Crowell being doubtful. Minnesota's defense is tough, but someone's gonna have to run the ball.
As a starting running back, so yeah. That's a good spot.
And then you got AJ Green against Kansas City. Kansas City has been really bad against wide receivers. They're 19th in the league. New England, they let up 30 points last week. They are in high-scoring games. And Cincinnati is a high-scoring offense so far this year. They're, I think, top 10 for scoring in the league. And A.J. Green, let's see what he had these past few weeks. So, yeah, 15 points, 14 points, 11.5 points. So he doesn't get too many touchdowns, but he's averaging around 80 yards a game and around 8 catches. So that's pretty decent for him. He does get red zone looks. He got 1 touchdown taken back last week on a holding in the end zone, or a holding by the offensive line when he caught it. So that's points right there I left on the board. Marvin Jones Jr., we talked about him being shadowed by Xavier Howard. I don't like this really, but there's not too much on his bench to pick up from. So as a Dolphin fan, I hope he doesn't do good, but since I'm picking him to do well, I'm hoping that maybe he gets 80 yards or even 100 yards against Miami, and they might switch him off, put him in motion a little bit to get Xavier Howard off him, and who knows. You got David Njoku, which has a pretty solid. He's starting to turn it on.
Yeah, he was in both of our top 5s for tight ends this week.
Yeah, so last week he had 8 targets, or 2 weeks ago 8. Last week he had 10, and he had 7 catches out of those 10 with 55 yards and a touchdown with 14.5 points last week. So he's starting to turn it on, and they are playing Tampa Bay, which they can't stop anyone either. I mean, they just fired their defensive coordinator, so hopefully, who knows, Tampa Bay, that might be some motivation for their defense to say, hey, our coach just got fired. Maybe our head coach will get fired later down the season. We've got to turn something around. But with Gerald McCoy being out, that defense is just getting weaker and weaker. So I'm looking for David Njoku to have a big game. Robert Woods, so we talked about him a little bit with Cooper Kupp being out. So that's definitely going to help him and Brandon Cooks and Todd Gurley itself. But I'm looking for Robert Woods. This is going to be a high-scoring game. It's against San Francisco, and hopefully he can get a touchdown or 2. He's had a pretty decent season, really.
Yeah, I think he's 6th overall in our league right now as
for
far as
wide receivers
go.
So he had 28 points, 18.5 points, 16.5, and 14.5. But 14.5 was against Denver. Minnesota, he had 18.5, and against the Chargers, he had 28. So he's had almost 4 straight 100-yard receiving games. So hopefully you can keep that up this week. Defense, you got some work to do. I'm trusting in you, Sack Lives Matter, that you will actually go out there and make some moves on the free agents and pick some defenses and a quarterback up. But Adam Vinatieri for Indianapolis, if Buffalo does not let up a lot of points as far as touchdown goes, they are kind of stingy in the red zone. So I'm hoping that Indianapolis, with Adam Vinatieri, he can get maybe 5 field goals. And, I mean, they're not a high-scoring offense, but with T.Y. Hilton being back, if he does score a touchdown, that's going to be at least 1 point for Adam Vinatieri. So, yeah, I'm picking Sack Lives Matter. Like I said, you got a lot of work to do. I'm trusting in you, but hopefully you beat Wide Right.
Yeah, so this is going to be a fun matchup because Sack Lives Matter do have 3 players in my top 5 at their position. It's just he messed up his roster so bad with Russell Wilson starting and his defense that he picked up on his bench who already played. And this is just a tough spot for him, and I think Wide Right can come in and squeak this out despite having the worst roster, honestly.
Yep. So we're going to move on to our second to last matchup. So we got Lucky Neckbeards versus Tobias Anal Rapist. So I think we differed on this one as well. So I got Lucky Neckbeards winning this one. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen, they've just been explosive so far this season, and he has both of them. So Kirk Cousins gets the Jets. We already talked about the Jets so far not being too good. So the last 3 games, they've let up over 20 points against Jacksonville, Blake Bortles, Case Keenum, not very good, and then Andrew Luck. Yeah, that's the best quarterback out of those 3, and 20 points out for the rest of them. So that's pretty decent, and I'm looking for Kirk Cousins to. I think they're going to score at least 30 points in this game. And with Dalvin Cook being out, they do have Latavius Murray, but they're going to have to rely even more on that passing attack. So I think this will be a pretty good game for him. Melvin Gordon, he's just been insane so far this year. Really, he really has. And they're playing Tennessee, which can be a stingy defense, but right now he's the number 2 running back in the league so far, scoring-wise. 26 points, 19, 33. Last week he had 132 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. That is insane. So I'm hoping he can have a good game. Tennessee is pretty stingy. They're 6th against the run, so it's not a good rushing matchup for him. And then Marlon Mack, I don't like this. This is the probably the player on this team that I don't like the best. But on your bench, it's kind of hard because you got Le'Veon Bell. He's not playing. You got James Conner. They're on a bye week. So you kind of have to play Marlon Mack here. He had 8.5 points last week. Hey, good for you. Hopefully you're healthy and can at least get 5 points. That's what I'm looking for him. If you can get 5, I think Lucky Nick Beards will definitely win. And then I talked about Adam Thielen. He has been the number one scoring wide receiver at all this entire season. 25 points, 17, 23, 20.5, 23.5. He has had every single game that he's played this year, he's had over 100 yards. He's on pace to, I think he has 54 catches in the entire season so far. So he's on pace to break the single season reception record too. Kirk Cousins loves him. They love throwing him the ball. And Minnesota definitely messed up paying out. Maybe not messed up, but they paid the guy they thought that would be the number one, and it just turns out that he wasn't. So good job for Adam Thielen. He's definitely going to get paid this offseason. Alshon Jeffrey, since he's gotten back and Carson Wentz gotten back, he's been pretty well. He had 20 points, then he dropped down to 4. And then he had 23 because he had 2 touchdowns last week. So he seems like he was hurt against Minnesota, and that is a stingy defense. But against Tennessee, he had 100 yards and a touchdown. Against the Giants, he had 74 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Carolina's defense isn't the best. Let's see where they're ranked at. Oh, that's not right.
15th against wide receivers.
So 15th. So they're really average. So Alshon Jeffrey, he's just another red zone target for Carson Wentz. So it takes a little bit of value away from Zach Ertz, but not really because Zach Ertz blew up last year when Alshon Jeffrey was healthy. He's that number one wide receiver besides Zach Ertz on that team, so he's going to get the ball during that game. Eric Ebron, you already talked about how Hilton coming back, that's going to take down Eric Ebron's value a little bit, but Jack Doyle is out for this game, so that should help him back up. And they're playing against Buffalo, which against tight ends 11th. So they've been pretty stingy too, but I think maybe he can get 7 or 8 points out of him. Who knows, if he gets a touchdown, that could be 14-15. So Jermaine Kearse in his flex. At first, I didn't like this at all. I was like, but Quincy Enunwa is ruled out, and Robbie Anderson is doubtful so he's been limited throughout practice, so there's no doubtful tag on him yet, but he's dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's a speed guy. So when a speed guy has a hamstring injury, which helps you become fast, that's not good. So they could be down their top 2 wide receivers. So they are playing Minnesota, which is a tough defense, but he could be that number 1 wide receiver on the Jets team this week. So I like him playing this week. Ravens defense, they're playing New Orleans, so if New Orleans gets hot, they could just go off, and this could be a really bad matchup for the Ravens defense. But I think this is just going to be an old-school football game where they're just going to run it out. And like I said, I think each team's going to get less than 20 points. Drew Brees has never beaten the Ravens, so hopefully they can keep that streak going. And then Greg Zuerlein, he's back. And they're playing San Francisco, so he should get a lot of work, at least with extra points. So I actually... Okay, yeah. In another league, I picked him up, but yeah, this is a great pickup by Lucky Neck Beards. He actually picked him up a week early. He picked him up last week because I was looking up and grabbing him, but that's a good steal off the waiver wires from him. As far as his bench goes, there's not too much out there. Greg Olsen, but he's starting Eric Ebron. I might make that switch, but they're playing against Philadelphia, so it's kind of a wash for those. Andrew Luck, I wouldn't start him over Kirk Cousins. And then Calvin Ridley. At first, I wanted to start him over Jermaine Kearse, but he's real touchdown dependent, and with the other wide receivers on the Jets being hurt, I like Jermaine Kearse. So I think you got a pretty solid team, and I mean you're the best team in the league right now. It's 5-1, so keep it up, Lucky Neckbeards.
Yeah, it's funny because one of your least favorite players on this team is one of my favorites, and that's Marlon Mack. Because this was a great free agent pickup, I think, because Marlon Mack came in back from injury and proved that he is the number 1 running back in that offense. And I actually really like his talent level. He's a very explosive guy, and Buffalo has been not great against opposing running backs. They're 19th in the league overall. So I honestly think that the Colts go up by probably 14 points at some point in this game, and then they just run the ball a lot to try and kill clock. So this could be a really nice spot for Marlon Mack. I did pick the Tobias Anorapis in this matchup, though. We'll start at their quarterback spot. They're starting Carson Wentz. And for all the same reasons you like Kirk Cousins in his matchup, I like Carson Wentz as well. They lost Jay Ajayi, who was their number one running back, so that already means that they're going to throw the ball quite a bit more. And on top of that, their two running backs behind Ajayi, Clement and Smallwood, are both pass catchers mainly. So they're going to throw the ball to the running backs a lot, and then Zach Ertz and Alshon Jeffrey as well. I just see Carson Wentz throwing the ball 40 to 50 times in this game, and then maybe running the ball 15 times. Ezekiel Elliott against Washington. Elliott's just one of the best running backs in the league. He's an obvious start every single week against any defense, and I think this is a spot where he probably sees 20 fantasy points. I spoke about Mark Ingram in his RB2 spot earlier and how he's taken over RB1 duties from Alvin Kamara in his one game back. He had 16 carries for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. New Orleans is just so good at getting in the red zone and getting down to the goal line, and Mark Ingram is the perfect running back to have in those situations. That's why he got those 2 touchdowns the last game they played, and I expect more of the same this week, honestly. I think he probably sees at least 1 touchdown from 2 or 3 yards out. Golden Tate and Jarvis Landry at his wide receiver 1 and 2 spot, both PPR monsters. This is a half-point PPR league. I like Golden Tate against Miami because I don't think Xavier Howard will be on him much at all, and I don't know if I trust the other Dolphin cornerbacks all that much, and Golden Tate is just a really, really good wide receiver. He's a very athletic guy who is a yak monster, and I like him in this spot. Jarvis Landry against Tampa Bay. They're going to score a lot of points against Tampa Bay. Jarvis Landry is going to be open all game, and I think he probably sees 10 to 12 receptions for probably 100 yards here. Great spot for him. And then Travis Kelce at tight end against Cincinnati. There's going to be close to 100 points scored in this game, I think, and a lot of those red zone targets are going to go to Travis Kelce. He has been a absolute beast the past, 5 weeks? 25 points, 15, 16.5, 12.5, and 8.5. Just really, really good numbers. He's the number 3 ranked tight end overall right now, but after this week, I think he'll be for sure ranked number 1 overall in the league. Zach Ertz might compete with him a little bit, but Travis Kelce is just on another planet as far as tight ends go, I think. Will Fuller in his flex spot. I don't love this spot for him because I think Will Fuller will see a bit of Jalen Ramsey when he's not shadowing Hopkins. On the plays where he's not on him, Will Fuller could see some targets, but I like Kiki Cutie in this matchup a bit more just because I think Houston will be trying to get a lot of quick passes off, and Will Fuller is much more of a street guy. He's a 9-route guy, and you really need good pass blocking, and I just don't think you can have good pass blocking against Jacksonville in order to get that time to throw Will Fuller the ball deep down the field. So Kiki Cutie's a much better play here, I think. The Panthers' defense against Philadelphia, I don't like this because you're starting Carson Wentz and you're also starting the Panthers' defense. One of them is going to do good and the other one isn't. So this is a rough spot. I don't think the Panthers' defense is going to have a good game here. I think they'll be positive in points, like maybe 2, 3, 4 fantasy points, something like that. But I don't think this is a good spot for them. I would probably drop them for Dallas's defense if he hears this podcast before the last guy we told to do that hears it. That was Sack Lives Matter, I believe. And then Gostkowski at kicker against Chicago. This is a great spot for him. I think Gostkowski gets you at least 15 fantasy points this week because I think they're going to score all over the Chicago defense.
Yeah, you had some really good points, especially Mark Ingram. Like, we saw that when they were, like, first and goal at the 3 or anywhere below the 3 and down, they took Kamara out. They put Mark Ingram right in, and that's how he vultured those 2 touchdowns, especially with Kamara only getting 6 rushes, with Mark Ingram getting 16. I think he's going to have another really good game. So, yeah, this is going to be a good matchup, and definitely because, Travis Kelce, I said this last podcast, but he's definitely taken over for Gronk, and he's the number 1 tight end in football right now.
Yeah, he's the best tight end in the league, hands down, I think. All right, moving on to our final matchup of the night. We have Team Cortez versus Dalvin and the Chipmunks, and I believe we both picked Dalvin and the Chipmunks in this matchup,
Yep.
and honestly, I think it's going to be a blowout. I don't think it's going to be that close. They both had their RB1s play already, so Team Cortez had David Johnson go and get him 7.5 fantasy points. David Johnson was in our top 5 for running backs this week. He was in mine. I think he was in yours as well.
We blew that.
Yeah, he didn't have a great game, but Mike McCoy got fired because of it. So at least some good came from David Johnson not having a good game. Down and the Chipmunks RB1 was Royce Freeman, which I believe we spoke about not being a great decision, and he started him anyway. So you went with the gamble, and it definitely didn't pay off. I don't think it hurts you with 9 fantasy points, but it wasn't a good game from Royce Freeman at all. He's starting Duke Johnson at RB2 here. I'm just going to talk about Down in the Chipmunks, I guess, because I already started talking about him. So at QB, he's got Patrick Mahomes against Cincinnati. This is going to be a huge game for Mahomes. I already said I think there's going to be 100 points scored in this game. I think Mahomes pops off and has a monster game. Duke Johnson at his RB2 spot. This is a good spot for him with Carlos Hyde gone. He's going to see quite a few carries, I think, because they like Nick Chubb there a lot, but I don't think Chubb is going to be seeing 90% of the carries like Carlos Hyde was. They're going to be much more 50-50, and on passing downs, Duke Johnson is going to be the running back in there because he's a very, very good pass-catching back. So this could be a good spot for him, and moving forward, I think Duke Johnson and Nick Chubb's value is pretty equal, honestly. Until we see otherwise, I think they're definitely equal. At his wide receiver spots, he's got DeAndre Hopkins and Allen Robinson. I like both these matchups. Allen Robinson has turned it on a bit more in the previous weeks, and Trubisky is kind of figuring out that he has to throw the ball down the field in order to win games. And if you're going to be throwing the ball down the field in that offense, your main target is going to be Allen Robinson. DeAndre Hopkins is a fantasy monster. He was the number 1 overall wide receiver last year in fantasy leagues, and he's number 5 in the league so far this year. I think he sees a lot of Jalen Ramsey in this matchup, but I believe last year the only wide receiver Ramsey didn't have a lot of success against was DeAndre Hopkins. It's a divisional matchup. The teams know each other very well, and Hopkins just really, really likes beating Jalen Ramsey. So this is going to be a fun one to watch. George Kittle at tight end versus the Rams. The Rams are one of the best defenses in the league. I don't love this matchup, but the Niners have shown that if they're going to have a passing attack, it's going to be mainly through George Kittle and Marquise Goodwin. I think Kittle sees at least 10 targets. He may only catch 5 of those balls, but I think he probably gets you 50, 60 receiving yards, maybe gets you a touchdown, but I think you're looking at least 6 to 7 fantasy points here with just catches and yards. And then Devin Funchess in the flex spot. I just don't like Devin Funchess personally. He's more of a tight end than a wide receiver. He did have a nice game last week against Washington with a touchdown and 15.5 fantasy points. So you kind of got to hope for more of that here. Hopefully this game is very high scoring for Dalvin and the Chipmunks, Carolina versus Philadelphia. And it could be. Both these offenses are pretty strong. And then the Bears defense versus New England. I hate this matchup. I know they're the Bears defense and they've been really good all year and you have to start them, but Tom Brady's going to pick this defense apart, I think. This is going to be a negative point game from the Bears defense unless Khalil Mack can just go Super Saiyan and absolutely tear them up. And then Will Lutz at kicker, solid overall kicker in a matchup that it could be pretty slow, but if it is slow, we could see most of the points scored off field goals here. So this could be a really nice spot for him. On the bench, he's got Dion Lewis, Isaiah Crowell, Javorius Allen. I don't know if I'd start any of them over what he's got in right now.
Yeah, no, I like Dalvin and the Chipmunks in this matchup. That's why I'm picking them. The thing about the Bears, Khalil Mack really didn't do anything against Miami. I think maybe he had 1 sack, but he's actually been limited with an ankle injury the last 2 weeks. So I think that should help Dalvin and the Chipmunks, or it should hurt him, really, in that Bears matchup against New England. You didn't leave me much to talk about. Sorry to Cortez, but I'll talk about your team. So Deshaun Watson, he's been all right so far these last couple weeks. Let's see, 31 points, 21, but then only 5 points against Buffalo. And Buffalo, that's their strong suit, their defense, but they're not very good on defense, especially so their offensive line. One of their starting tackles has already been ruled out against this game, and their offensive line, even with that tackle, has not been good at all. And they're getting against Jacksonville, which the strength of their defense is their defensive line. So I don't think Deshaun Watson is going to have a lot of time at all to throw the ball deep downfield. And especially, he could use his rushing attack, but that is what Jacksonville is. They are speed, so they can catch up to Deshaun Watson. So I don't think he'll have a good game. All right, we already talked about David Johnson kind of underperforming, 7.5 points, but it was weird. And we were both watching the game Thursday night, and he was splitting carries with the other running back.
Chase Edmonds, yeah, it was flabbergasting, honestly.
It doesn't make sense. He's your best offensive weapon on that team. Use him. Do not take him out of the game unless he's like, hey, coach, I need a breather. I'm hurt. Do something. Right now in his second running back, he's got Chris Carson starting, which he's on a bye. But the only other running back on his bench, Marshawn Lynch, is on a bye as well. We already talked about him being hurt. But Chris Ivory, the backup running back in Buffalo. So you got to Well, you're laughing.
Chris Ivory is averaging 4.8 fantasy points per game right now. His last 3 weeks are 1 point, 4 points, and 0.5 points. That's just a really rough spot. Oh.
Yeah. You got to do something on this free agency and get someone, because if you start Chris Ivory, you definitely will lose this matchup. I mean, maybe you'll be a better chance just starting Chris Carson over Chris Ivory, but for your wide receivers, so this is kind of your strong point. You got Brandon Cooks, Michael Crabtree, and then Deshaun Jackson in your flex. Brandon Cooks, we already talked about him having a big game against the Rams offense as a whole, having a big game against San Francisco, especially with Cooper Kupp being out. That's going to be more looks to Cooks and Woods. So Cooks, you're going to have a great game. Michael Crabtree, he's been really their slot guy this year. And they're playing against New Orleans. We talked about this game being kind of slow, but in the middle of that, New Orleans defense is their kind of weak point, and they are last in the league, 32second against wide receivers fantasy. So it's a good fantasy to go against as far as New Orleans defense is. So Michael Crabtree, you should have a pretty solid game, and Deshaun Jackson in your flex. It's weird. So I really didn't think that. Jameis Winston liked Deshaun Jackson. They weren't really able to get on the same page last year. But, hey, he did hit him for a couple long balls. He had 4 catches for 77 yards, no touchdown. He got 9 points. If he can get 11 to 12 points, that's pretty solid for him. Just get a couple more catches. And so your wide receivers are your strength of your team. Rob Gronkowski. So I was looking at his stats, and he hasn't gotten a touchdown since week 1. The last 4 weeks, he's been 7 points, 6 points, 10 points, and 10.5. And last week, most of his yards, he's 3 catches off 97 yards. And if you were watching the game last Sunday night, it was in the fourth quarter on that last drive. He had 2 giant catches. That's all his points came from. Teams are deciding to double Gronk. They're starting to figure out a little bit this year. And against Kansas City, he had 10.5 points. So they're playing Chicago, which we talk about the defense not being as good as it actually seemed, but they're still a top 15 defense so far this year. So Gronk, I think you could still average around that 8 to 10, maybe 8 to 12 points. But you're going to need something, Team Cortez. Rams defense against San Francisco. I like this matchup. I really do. I think both of us had this as our number 1 or number 2 in our top 5 going against San Francisco. And then the kicker for Houston, Fairbairn, sorry guy, playing against Jacksonville. He might have a big game. I mean, because I don't think the Houston's offense is going to get too many touchdowns. So he could get maybe in the 30, 40, or 50-yard range for field goals. And if he kicks 3 or 4 of those, that's almost 10 points. So he could be one of the strong suits on your team. But, yeah, we're both going down with Dalvin and the Chipmunks. Sorry, Team Cortez. You are the lowest scoring team in our league, and you're 3-3, but it looks like it's going to get a lot worse for you.
Yeah, this is a tough spot. I mean, if he wins this matchup, it's going to come off like 30 fantasy points from the Rams defense, I think. He needs them to have 2 pick sixes. He needs them to have a Denver-esque game, what they just did against Arizona. He needs that from the Rams defense in this matchup. He also needs – Rob Gronkowski's due for a touchdown. So if he gets 100 yards and a touchdown and sees 17 fantasy points or something like that here, it's a hope and a prayer for Team Cortez in this matchup, I think. That's why I went against him. But it's not like he's 100% going to lose. There is always a chance, any given fantasy Sunday, all that stuff. But I definitely like Dalvin and the Chipmunks team better here.
Yeah, and you got to shore up that second running back position. You can't start a guy who's on a bye, and you can't start a guy who's a backup and is averaging 4 points. That's not going to help you at all. So
yeah, get rid of Chris Ivory.
Get out there on the free agency and pick a running back up.
All right, and I think that does it for all of our matchups this week, which means that does it for our fantasy football podcast this week. You are listening to Just Two Assholes Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Daniel Powell.
And I'm Matt Bowen. Remember to watch or listen to this on YouTube and comment, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And we really appreciate it, guys. Leave some comments in there on how we can make this podcast even better. And just remember that 2 assholes are better than 1.
Bye, guys.